The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched out like a vast theater. Hundreds of seats filled the circular chamber, each section marked with different alien symbols. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime as dozens of species argued in their native tongues. Ambassador Jake Morrison sat in the human section, watching the chaos unfold. His gray hair was neatly combed, and his blue eyes remained calm despite the heated debate around him. Next to him, Lieutenant Colonel Lisa Barnes tapped quietly on her datapad, taking notes of every accusation thrown at humanity. The Zeltharian Prime Minister Thextal stood at the center podium, his green skin glistening under the bright lights. His voice boomed through the speakers as he pointed a clawed finger toward the human delegation. For 50 years these humans have disrupted our ancient ways, Thextal declared. They give advanced technology to species that have not earned it. They interfere with natural selection among civilizations. They upset the balance that has kept our galaxy stable for thousands of years. Murmurs of agreement came from the Keth and Velthic sections. The three major powers had controlled galactic politics long before humans arrived. They decided which species could join the council and which would remain as servants or subjects. Jake remembered his first day as ambassador 20 years ago. He had been young and hopeful then, believing that humanity could help create a better galaxy. He had proposed the Medical Aid Initiative, wanting to send human doctors to help with disease outbreaks. The council voted it down, saying it would make weaker species dependent. Then came the Education Exchange Program. Jake thought alien students could learn in human universities while human students studied alien cultures. Again, the council refused. The major powers said knowledge should be earned, not given freely. The Refugee Protection Accord was Jake's latest attempt. Pirates and raiders attacked defenseless colonies regularly. The human proposal would create safe zones and provide protection for displaced populations. For months, Jake had worked with smaller species to build support for the idea. Lisa handed him the final vote count. His heart sank as he read the numbers. 847 against, 23 in favor. Only the newest council members and a few oppressed colonies had supported humanity's proposal. The humans claim they want to help, continued a Keth representative, rising from his seat. But they really want to control. They build their bases in our space. They train our people in their methods. They make our colonies dependent on their technology. Jake stood slowly, his chair scraping against the metal floor. The chamber fell silent as all eyes turned to him. Ambassadors from hundreds of worlds waited to hear humanity's response to these charges. For years, Jake had defended his species with patience and logic. He had explained that humans offered partnership, not control. He had shown how human technology could solve problems that had plagued the galaxy for centuries. He had proven that cooperation worked better than domination, but the vote count told a different story. After 5 decades of trying to work within the council system, humanity had failed to change minds. The major powers would never accept humans as equals. They saw only threats to their control. Jake picked up his briefcase and began putting away his papers. Lisa watched him with confusion, then started gathering her own materials. Around the chamber, other human representatives began standing and collecting their belongings. Ambassador Morrison, Thextal called out, his voice sharp with irritation. Surely you have something to say about your species' latest attempt to undermine our established protocols? Jake closed his briefcase with a soft click. He looked around the chamber one last time, seeing the faces of beings he had worked with for decades. Some looked curious, others angry, many simply bored. None looked like they cared about the suffering. That would continue because of their vote. He walked toward the main exit, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Lisa and the other human staff followed behind him. At the great doors, Jake stopped and turned back to face the assembled council. The human delegation wishes the council well in their future endeavors, he said clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. Then he walked out. The doors closed behind the humans with a heavy thud. Inside the chamber, confused murmurs began to rise. Some representatives seemed puzzled by the humans' quiet departure. Others looked pleased to see their rivals leave without a fight. What none of them knew was that similar scenes were happening across the galaxy at that exact moment. On space stations, orbital platforms, planetary capitals, and research facilities, human representatives were having the same quiet conversations and making the same dignified exits. Captain Ryan Walsh had just finished loading the last of the human research equipment onto his cargo ship at Keth Prime. Dr. Angela Price, the chief atmospheric engineer, sat in the passenger lounge looking out at the planet she had helped terraform. Her 15 years of work had turned 3 dead worlds into green paradises that now fed billions of Keth citizens. Did they really think we would stay forever without any appreciation? Angela asked as the ship pulled away from the orbital dock. Back on the planet's surface, Keth officials were just beginning to realize that all the human advisors had left their posts. The atmospheric processing plants were shutting down automatically. The agricultural systems were going into maintenance mode. The water purification networks were switching to emergency protocols. Admiral Patricia Hayes stood on the bridge of the battleship Liberty's Dawn as her fleet prepared to depart Velthic space. Her ships had protected Velthic trade routes for 15 years, keeping pirates and raiders at bay. Now those same trade ships would have to defend themselves. Send a message to all Council military forces, Patricia ordered her communications officer. Human military forces are withdrawing from all joint operations and shared facilities. We wish them success in their future endeavors. The message was brief and professional. No threats, no warnings, no demands. Just a simple statement of fact. The humans were leaving. On research stations throughout Council space, human scientists were downloading their personal files and shutting down their equipment. 50 years of accumulated knowledge and technology began disappearing as automated systems activated their security protocols. Trade coordinator Steve Johnson had spent 20 years building commercial relationships between human colonies and alien worlds. His deals had made dozens of species wealthy beyond their dreams. Now he was terminating every contract and partnership agreement. The exodus was quiet and organized. No one tried to stop the humans because they were leaving voluntarily. Many council members actually felt relieved. The troublesome humans with their disruptive ideas about equality and cooperation were finally gone. But as Jake Morrison's ship lifted off from the council homeworld, he looked back at the great city below and felt only sadness. Humanity had tried so hard to build something better. They had offered their best technology, their finest minds, and their deepest compassion to help create a galaxy where all species could thrive together. The Council had chosen differently. They preferred their ancient hierarchies and traditional power structures. Now they would have to live with that choice. Jake settled into his cabin for the long journey home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as humanity decided what to do next. But tonight he could finally rest knowing that his people had walked away with their dignity intact. The galaxy would never be the same. Captain Ryan Walsh watched through the viewport as Keth Prime grew smaller behind them. His cargo ship New Boston was one of hundreds making the same journey across the galaxy. In the passenger compartments, human civilians sat quietly, many seeing their adopted homes disappear for the last time. Dr. Angela Price sat in the ship's small cafeteria, stirring her coffee absently. She had spent 15 years on Keth Prime, longer than anywhere else in her life. The 3 dead worlds she had helped terraform were now green and beautiful, feeding billions of Keth citizens who would never know her name. They seemed genuinely surprised when I packed up the laboratory, Angela told Ryan when he joined her for dinner. After voting down every humanitarian proposal we made for 5 years, they could not understand why I was leaving. Ryan nodded, cutting into his synthetic steak. Same reaction at the spaceport. The dock supervisor kept asking if there was some mistake. He said they never asked us to leave. They never asked us to stay either, Angela replied quietly. Throughout the ship, similar conversations were happening. Chief Engineer Bobby Chen had taught Velthic engineers how to optimize their power grids for 10 years. The improvements he designed had increased their efficiency by 60% and saved countless lives during energy shortages. Xenobiologist Professor Kate Williams had cataloged over 40,000 species across Council space. Her research was freely shared with alien scientists who used it to develop medicines and improve agricultural yields. She had discovered the cure for Zeltharian bone rot and the solution to Keth crop blight. All of them were going home. The exodus was not just about people. Throughout Council space, human-built infrastructure began shutting down in a coordinated sequence. Automated systems that had been gifts to struggling colonies received their final maintenance updates, then activated self-destruct protocols to prevent reverse engineering. On Valthik 7, the fusion reactor that powered the entire industrial sector went into shutdown mode. The Valthik engineers who had operated it for years suddenly found themselves staring at blank control screens. The human-designed safety systems were completely locked out. "Can we restart it manually?" asked Plant Supervisor Morthek. The humans took all the technical manuals. His assistant replied nervously, and the computer core wiped itself clean before they left. Trade agreements dissolved automatically as human commercial software detected the departure of authorized personnel. Shipping routes that had been optimized over decades of careful negotiation suddenly became unavailable. Supply chains that connected hundreds of worlds began falling apart. Steve Johnson had built those trade networks from nothing. When humans first joined the Council, most species barely traded beyond their local systems. Fear, mistrust, and cultural differences kept them isolated. Steve had spent 20 years learning alien languages, customs, and business practices to create connections that benefited everyone. Now those connections were severing one by one. Automated trading systems shut down when they could not contact human oversight personnel. Shipping schedules collapsed when human logistics coordinators stopped responding to messages. Financial transfers failed when human banks closed their alien accounts. Admiral Patricia Hayes commanded the human fleet from her flagship Liberty's Dawn as they departed Valthik space. Her ships had patrolled these trade routes for 15 years, keeping pirates at bay and maintaining peace between rival species. The Valthik Navy had grown dependent on human sensor technology and tactical coordination. "Admiral," reported her communications officer, "the Valthik Fleet Command is requesting permission to escort us to the border." Patricia almost smiled. "Tell them that will not be necessary. We can find our way out." The irony was not lost on her. For years, Valthik politicians had complained about human military presence in their space. They had accused humans of using defense agreements to establish permanent bases. Now that the humans were actually leaving, the same politicians were suddenly concerned about security. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. Human patrol ships that had protected frontier colonies for decades began their journey home. Space stations that had served as neutral meeting grounds for diplomacy went dark as their human crews departed. Research facilities that had developed life-saving technologies shut down their laboratories. Dr. Martin Gray had run refugee medical programs for 20 years. His mobile hospitals had treated millions of displaced persons fleeing from wars, natural disasters, and persecution. The medical supplies, trained staff, and transportation networks he had built were the difference between life and death for countless beings. Now his ships were heading back to human space, loaded with equipment and personnel that would never return. Behind them, refugee camps throughout the frontier regions were left without medical support. The alien governments that had relied on human aid for so long had never developed their own capabilities. "We offered to train their doctors," Martin told his staff as they reviewed withdrawal reports. "We gave them medical equipment and treatment protocols for free. They were too busy in council sessions blocking our proposals to actually learn anything." The withdrawal was methodical and complete. Human businesses closed their alien offices and terminated local employees. Human schools that had educated alien children shut their doors. Human charities that had provided disaster relief ended their programs. None of it was done in anger or spite. Every facility was properly shut down. Every employee was given fair notice. Every program was transferred to local control when possible. The humans left behind detailed manuals and instruction, guides for maintaining their equipment. They honored every contract and paid every debt. But they took their knowledge with them. The most devastating loss was not visible immediately. For 50 years, humans had served as mediators and peacekeepers between rival species. Ancient territorial disputes had been settled through human diplomacy. Trade wars had been prevented by human negotiation. Cultural misunderstandings had been resolved by human translation services. Ambassador Jake Morrison had personally mediated over 300 disputes during his career. His patient work had prevented dozens of wars and saved millions of lives. The networks of trust and communication he had built were humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy. Those networks began collapsing the moment human diplomats left their posts. Without neutral mediators, old suspicions returned. Without patient translators, cultural differences became sources of conflict again. Without human peacekeepers, minor disagreements escalated into serious disputes. The Zeltharian Transport Guild immediately moved to claim human shipping routes. The Keith Mining Consortium began expanding into territories that humans had kept neutral. The Valthic Navy started conducting security patrols in areas where human forces had maintained the peace. Each move was technically legal under council law, but each move also threatened the interests of other species. Without human diplomats to mediate, these threats would eventually lead to conflict. Captain Walsh watched the star charts as his ship entered the hyperlane leading to human space. Behind them, hundreds of other vessels carried human citizens, equipment and knowledge away from council territory. Ahead of them lay the challenge of rebuilding their civilization without alien interference. "Do you think we're making the right choice?" asked Dr. Price as she joined him on the bridge. Walsh considered the question carefully. "We tried for 50 years to help them build something better. They chose politics over progress every single time. Maybe now they will learn to appreciate what they had. And if they do not, then they will face the consequences of their choices," Walsh replied. "Either way, we are finally free to build the kind of galaxy we actually want to live in." The exodus continued in silence, dignified and complete. No one tried to stop the humans because they were leaving voluntarily. Many alien officials even felt relieved to see their rivals departing without a fight. But in the depths of space, automated monitoring systems began detecting the first signs of trouble. Pirate raids increased in sectors where human patrols had withdrawn. Communication networks failed without human maintenance. Supply shortages appeared on worlds that had depended on human trade coordination. The quiet exodus was over. The aftermath was just beginning. 3 months after the human withdrawal, Keth General Commander Vexthor stared at the tactical display with growing alarm. Red markers showed pirate attacks across 17 different star systems. The Crimson Nebula pirates, who had been quiet for over a decade, were back in force. "How many ships did we lose in the Helix raid?" he asked his aide. 12 cargo vessels and 3 escort frigates, sir," came the nervous reply. The pirates knew exactly when our patrol schedule would leave the sector undefended. Vexthor felt a cold knot in his stomach. For 15 years, joint human-Keth patrols had kept the trade routes safe. Human sensor technology could detect pirate ships hiding in asteroid fields or nebula clouds. Human tactical computers could predict pirate movement patterns and coordinate fleet responses across multiple star systems. Now the Keth Navy was fighting alone, using equipment and methods that had not changed in decades. Their ships were slower than the pirates. Their sensors were easily fooled by basic stealth technology. Their communication systems were too slow to coordinate effective responses. "Request assistance from the Valthic Navy," ordered Vexthor. "Sir," his aide replied carefully. "The Valthics are dealing with their own crisis. The mining colonies in the Outer Rim are under attack by the same pirate fleets." The commander pulled up intelligence reports from across Council space. The situation was worse than he had imagined. Without human patrol ships maintaining security, every criminal organization in the galaxy was taking advantage of the chaos. Pirates, raiders, smugglers, and slave traders were operating openly in areas that had been safe for decades. On the other side of the galaxy, Zeltharian Agriculture Minister Quellness reviewed equally devastating reports from the outer colonies. 3 recently terraformed worlds were experiencing complete ecological collapse. Atmospheric processors were failing without human maintenance. Agricultural systems were producing toxic crops. Water purification networks were breaking down. "How many people are we going to lose?" she asked her staff. Current projections suggest 12 million deaths from starvation over the next 6 months, reported her chief advisor. Another 8 million from water contamination if we cannot repair the purification systems. Quellness had visited these worlds just 2 years ago. They had been green paradises with vast farms feeding hundreds of other Zeltharian colonies. Human engineers had spent decades perfecting the terraforming technology that made such rapid transformation possible. Why did we not acquire this technology ourselves? Demanded Quellness. The humans always said they would teach us, replied her aide. But we were too busy in council sessions blocking their proposals to attend their technical seminars. The minister remembered those seminars. Dr. Angela Price had offered to train Zeltharian engineers in atmospheric processing techniques. The courses were free and open to anyone who wanted to learn. But Zeltharian politicians had discouraged attendance, claiming the humans were trying to spread dangerous ideas about technological sharing. Now those worlds were dying, and no one knew how to save them. The first refugee crisis began in the frontier, zones where dozens of smaller species had built colonies under human protection. Without human patrol ships deterring raiders and human medical ships treating the displaced, these settlements became easy targets for every predator in the galaxy. The Rigel colony had been home to 50,000 Antaran refugees for 8 years. They had fled their homeworld during a civil war, finding safety under human protection. Human engineers had built their settlements, human doctors had treated their sick, and human teachers had educated their children. When the raiders came, there was no one to help them. Colony Administrator Jexnall sent desperate messages to the council begging for protection. The responses were politely worded but ultimately useless. The Zeltharians said the colony was outside their sphere of influence. The Keth claimed they had no ships to spare. The Valthics suggested the refugees should return to their homeworld. But our homeworld is still at war. Jexnall protested in his final transmission before the communication array was destroyed. The humans said we would be safe here. The humans had kept that promise for 8 years. Now the Antarans were on their own. Dr. Martin Gray sat in his office on Earth, watching news reports of the refugee crisis with a heavy heart. His subspace communicator received dozens of messages every day from alien doctors begging for medical supplies and treatment protocols. The requests came from camps, colonies, and hospitals across the galaxy. All of them went unanswered. We have to help them, Dr. Gray told Director Carol Murphy during their weekly meeting. People are dying from diseases we could easily treat. They made their choice, Murphy replied firmly. We offered partnership. We offered to teach them. We offered to work together for everyone's benefit. They chose dominance politics instead. But the refugees are not the ones who made that choice, Gray protested. No, but their governments did. And those governments need to face the consequences of their decisions. If we rush in to save them now, they will never learn to take care of themselves. The conversation ended there, but Gray continued to read. The desperate messages. Children dying from infections that human medicine could cure in hours. Pregnant mothers losing babies due to complications that human doctors could prevent. Elderly beings suffering from diseases that human technology had eliminated decades ago. The hardest part was knowing that help was available. Human medical. Ships sat in spaceports throughout human space, fully equipped and ready for deployment. Human doctors volunteered by the thousands to provide aid. Human pharmaceutical companies offered to donate medicine for free. All they needed was government authorization, which would never come. The economic collapse was even more severe than the humanitarian crisis. Trade routes that had connected hundreds of worlds for decades began falling apart without human coordination. Species discovered they had become dependent on human logistics networks they had never bothered to understand. Steve Johnson's commercial empire had linked agricultural worlds, with industrial centers, mining colonies with manufacturing planets, and research stations with markets hungry for new technology. The automated systems that managed this vast network required constant human oversight to function properly. Without that oversight, the system collapsed. Shipping costs increased by 400% overnight as automated routing systems failed. Essential goods became unavailable when supply chains broke down. Entire planetary economies crashed when their primary trade partners could no longer afford to buy their products. On Keth Prime, civilian protests filled the streets as food shortages reached critical levels. The agricultural worlds that supplied the homeworld were failing without human-designed terraforming equipment. Trade deals for food imports had died with the human withdrawal. We should have learned their methods when we had the chance, admitted Keth Trade Minister Dorseth during an emergency council session. But we were so focused on limiting their influence that we never developed our own capabilities. The same realization was spreading across the galaxy. For 50 years, the major powers had viewed humans as competitors to be controlled rather than partners to learn from. They had blocked human proposals not because the ideas were bad, but because they came from humans. Now they were paying the price for that short-sighted thinking. Velthic Emperor Axthu faced similar problems. Entire sectors of his empire were in revolt as colonial governors struggled without the human-designed communication networks and administrative systems they had relied upon. His advisors brought him reports of spreading chaos and economic collapse. "Send an envoy to the human homeworld," ordered the emperor. "Offer them favorable terms to return to council space." "Your Majesty," replied his aide carefully, "we have tried. They are not responding to any of our communications." The emperor was not surprised. He had spent decades working to limit human influence in galactic politics. He had voted against every human proposal and supported every measure designed to restrict human activities. The humans had no reason to trust him or his government, but he had to try. Similar attempts were being made by governments across the galaxy. Official delegations requested meetings with human representatives. Trade organizations offered lucrative contracts to entice human businesses back to council space. Military commanders suggested new partnership agreements that would give humans more autonomy. All of these overtures were politely declined or simply ignored. The humans had made their decision. They were building their own future, separate from the council and its politics. The galaxy that had rejected their friendship would have to learn to survive without their help. As General Commander Vexthor watched another pirate fleet escape into hyperspace, he wondered if survival was even possible. The Keth Navy had lost more ships in 3 months than in the previous 3 years combined. Trade revenues were down 70%. Colonial governors were reporting widespread civil unrest. The humans had been gone for only 3 months, but their absence was already tearing the galaxy apart. The systems they had built, the networks they had maintained, and the peace they had preserved were all collapsing without their steady guidance. 1 year after the human withdrawal, the Galactic Council faced its worst crisis in over 3 centuries. The carefully maintained balance of power had collapsed completely without human mediation. Ancient territorial disputes that had been quietly managed for decades were erupting into open warfare. The Threshold War began when Zeltharian forces moved to claim the abandoned human research station at Kepler's Gate. The facility contained advanced manufacturing, equipment and computer systems that both the Zeltharians and Velthics desperately needed to rebuild their failing economies. Velthic Admiral Kethmore arrived at the station with his own fleet just hours after the Zeltharian occupation began. Both sides had legal claims to the territory under different council treaties. In the past, human diplomats would have mediated such disputes through careful negotiation. Without human mediators, negotiations failed within minutes. The Kepler facility belongs to the Velthic Empire under the Mining Rights Treaty of 2387, Admiral Kethmore declared over the communication channel. The research station Accords of 2401 clearly give territorial control to whoever maintains active scientific operations, replied Zeltharian Fleet Commander Yextal. We have personnel on the station right now. Evacuate immediately or face the consequences, warned Kethmore. The first shots were fired 6 hours later when a Zeltharian patrol ship refused to leave the station's perimeter. Within minutes, both fleets were engaged in full combat. The battle raged for 3 days before spreading to nearby star systems as reinforcements arrived from both empires. Admiral Derek Foster watched the reports from his retirement home on New Virginia Colony. He had spent 30 years preventing exactly this kind of conflict through patient diplomacy and careful power balancing. His weathered face showed deep sadness as he read the casualty reports. We spent decades building trust between these species, he told his wife Helen, who had served as a diplomatic aide during his career. They called us meddlers for trying to keep them from each other's throats. How many dead so far? Helen asked quietly. Over 40,000 in the first week, Derek replied. And it's spreading. The Keth are mobilizing their fleets to take advantage of the chaos. 3 minor species have declared independence from their protective agreements. The whole frontier is falling apart. The economic collapse was even worse than the military situation. Without human trade networks, commercial relationships that had developed over 50 years were dissolving overnight. Species that had become prosperous through human-mediated commerce found themselves isolated and impoverished. The Antaran Industrial Collective had built their entire economy around manufacturing components for human-designed systems. When the humans left, demand for their products disappeared completely. Unemployment reached 90% within 6 months. Social unrest followed quickly as desperate citizens demanded answers from their government. Similar crises were happening across the galaxy. Agricultural worlds that had fed dozens of species through human distribution networks watched their crops rot in storage. Mining colonies that had sold rare minerals through human trade deals could no longer find buyers. Research stations that had shared discoveries through human academic networks found themselves cut off from scientific collaboration. On Keth Prime, civilian protests had grown into full-scale riots. The planetary government imposed martial law as hungry citizens stormed food distribution centers. The agricultural worlds that normally supplied the homeworld were still struggling with failed terraforming systems. We need to restore the atmospheric processors on the outer colonies, declared Emergency Governor Polthek during a crisis meeting. Without them, we will lose our food supply permanently. The human engineers took all the technical documentation, replied his agricultural minister. Our people have been trying to reverse engineer the systems for months, but the technology is too advanced. What about the instruction manuals they left behind? Written in human mathematical notation that we cannot fully understand. We estimate it would take our best scientists 15 years to decode their methods. We do not have 15 years, Polthek said grimly. We have maybe 15 weeks before starvation becomes widespread. The governor authorized increasingly desperate measures. Keth scientists were ordered to work around the clock on decoding human technology. Trade missions were sent to neutral species, begging for food aid. Military forces were deployed to secure any remaining human equipment that might contain useful information. None of these efforts succeeded. Human technology was too advanced and too well protected to be easily copied. Neutral species had their own problems without human support. The remaining human equipment had been thoroughly wiped clean before abandonment. Velthic Emperor Axthu faced even greater challenges. His empire was coming apart as colonial worlds declared independence rather than face economic collapse. The communication networks that had held his vast territory together were failing without human maintenance. How many sectors have we lost contact with? He asked his advisors during their daily crisis meeting. 17 sectors are completely dark, reported his intelligence minister. Another 31 are reporting only intermittent communication. The colonial governors in the Outer Rim have stopped responding to imperial orders entirely. Send the fleet to restore order, commanded the emperor. Your Majesty, our fleet is engaged in the Threshold War. We cannot withdraw ships without losing territory to the Zeltharians. The emperor stared at the strategic map showing his crumbling empire. Red zones marked areas of rebellion. Yellow zones showed communications failures, and gray zones indicated complete loss of contact. What had once been the largest political entity in the galaxy was dissolving into chaos. Contact the human government again, he ordered. Offer them anything they want. Complete autonomy, territorial concessions, favorable trade agreements, even formal apologies for past treatment. We have tried, Your Majesty. They continue to ignore all diplomatic overtures. The irony was bitter. For decades, Emperor Axthu had worked to exclude humans from galactic politics. He had voted against every human proposal and supported every measure designed to limit human influence. The humans had no reason to trust his sudden change of heart, but desperation made him try anyway. Dr. Martin Gray received hundreds of medical emergency reports every day from across council space. Refugee camps had become death traps without human medical support. Hospitals were overwhelmed by patients they could not treat. Entire colonies were facing disease outbreaks that could be easily prevented with human vaccines. "We have to do something," he told Director Carol Murphy for the 100th time. "The death toll is approaching 10 million beings." "The answer remains the same," Murphy replied firmly. "We offered them partnership and cooperation for 50 years. They chose dominance games instead. Now they must live with the consequences." "But children are dying," Gray protested. "Innocent people who had nothing to do with council politics. Children died during the refugee crises we tried to prevent," Murphy pointed out. "Innocent people suffered during the trade wars we tried to stop. The council ignored our humanitarian proposals because they cared more about political power than saving lives. So we abandoned them to prove a point? We step back so they can learn to take responsibility for their own actions. If we rescue them now, they will never develop the capabilities they need to survive independently." The debate continued within human government circles, but the policy remained unchanged. Humanitarian aid ships stayed in port. Medical supplies remained in warehouses. Human doctors watched the crisis unfold from the safety of human space, forbidden to help despite their desperate desire to act. The most devastating aspect of the collapse was the breakdown of interspecies cooperation. Without human mediation, old prejudices and cultural conflicts returned with a vengeance. Species that had worked together for decades became enemies almost overnight. The Rigel Memorial incident sparked the worst violence. A Zeltharian memorial service for war dead was disrupted by Keth protesters who claimed the ceremony violated their religious customs. Without human cultural liaisons to explain the misunderstanding, both sides assumed deliberate insult. Fighting broke out in the streets of 3 different cities. Zeltharian businesses on Keth worlds were burned by angry mobs. Keth students at Zeltharian universities were attacked by radical groups. Diplomatic relations between the two species collapsed completely within hours. Ambassador Jake Morrison watched the news reports from his new office in the Colonial Administration building on Earth. The species he had worked with for 20 years were tearing each other apart over misunderstandings that human diplomats could have resolved in minutes. "Could we have done anything differently?" asked his former aide Lisa Barnes, who now worked as a policy analyst for the human government. Jake considered the question carefully. "We could have been more patient. We could have tried harder to understand their perspectives. We could have made different compromises. But would it have mattered in the end?" "Probably not," Jake admitted. "They were never really interested in building something better. They wanted to maintain their power structures while taking advantage of our technology and expertise. Real change would have threatened their control." So walking away, 2 years had passed since humanity walked away from the Galactic Council. The galaxy they left behind was unrecognizable. Where once there had been order, now there was chaos. Where once there had been cooperation, now there was conflict. The council itself had fractured into competing groups as old alliances crumbled without human mediation. Captain Linda Shaw stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel Horizon's Edge as it completed its survey of the Andromeda Transit Zone. This region of space had been barely explored during the council years due to political restrictions on human expansion. Now it was becoming the heart of a new human colonial empire. "Terraforming of New Shanghai is ahead of schedule," reported Science Officer Pete Collins. "We will have full atmospheric conversion in 18 months instead of 3 years. "What about the mineral surveys on New Denver?" Shaw asked. "Exceptional results. The asteroid belt contains more rare elements than our previous 5 colonies combined. We could supply the entire human fleet with advanced materials from this system alone." Shaw nodded with satisfaction. Without council oversight limiting their activities, human technology had advanced at an incredible rate. Fusion reactors that had been deemed too destabilizing by alien politicians now powered massive industrial complexes. Artificial intelligence systems banned by council law optimized everything from agriculture to space traffic control. The new human worlds were marvels of engineering and planning. Cities rose from empty planets in months rather than years. Terraforming systems turned dead rocks into garden worlds with efficiency that would have amazed the old council. Transportation networks connected dozens of star systems with faster and safer travel than had ever existed in council space. But the most important difference was not technological. It was philosophical. Human colonies welcomed refugees and immigrants from any species willing to live by human values of cooperation and equality. The Kital insectoids, dismissed as too primitive for council membership, proved to be brilliant engineers once given access to human education and resources. Dr. Jenny Clark ran the integration program at New Vancouver Colony, where over 60 different species lived and worked together. Her most successful students were often beings that the council had classified as intellectually limited or culturally incompatible. The Kital workers completed the fusion plant construction in half the projected time, she reported during her monthly briefing. Their natural understanding of complex systems is extraordinary. The council never gave them a chance to demonstrate their abilities. Even more remarkable were the crystalline resonance entities. The council had classified them as non-sentient because they communicated through electromagnetic patterns rather than spoken language. Human scientists had discovered that these beings possessed collective intelligence far beyond any individual organic mind. The partnership between humans and resonance entities had produced revolutionary communication technologies. Instantaneous messaging across galactic distances was now possible through resonance relay networks. The breakthrough was so significant that it fundamentally changed how interstellar civilization could function. We can coordinate activities across 20 star systems in real time, explained Chief Communications Officer Paul Martinez during a fleet meeting. The old council could never have achieved this level of integration even with their most advanced technology. On Earth, President Kevin Adams reviewed the monthly intelligence reports from council space with his cabinet. The news was consistently grim. The Threshold War had consumed entire sectors of the galaxy. Economic collapse had reduced once prosperous worlds to subsistence-level existence. Refugee crises were spreading as billions of beings fled from conflict zones. The death toll from the war has exceeded 50 million, reported Secretary of State Maria Lopez. Another 100 million are displaced and living in refugee camps without adequate food or medical care. What about disease outbreaks? Asked the president. 17 major epidemics are spreading through council space. Without human medical technology and expertise, they lack the capability to develop effective treatments. Conservative estimates suggest 20 million additional deaths over the next year. President Adams set down the report with a heavy sigh. The human government received hundreds of requests for aid every day. Desperate pleas from alien doctors, politicians, and ordinary citizens begging for help that could save millions of lives. All of these requests were carefully reviewed and ultimately declined. Are we receiving any official diplomatic overtures? Adams asked. Daily, Lopez replied. The Velthic Empire is offering us complete autonomy and territorial concessions. The Zeltharian Republic has proposed a formal alliance with humans as equal partners. Even the Keth Collective has authorized their ambassadors to negotiate any agreement we might find acceptable. Too little, too late, said the president. We spent 60 years trying to build a stable galactic community based on cooperation and mutual respect. They wanted dominance games instead. Now they can live with the consequences of that choice. The conversation was interrupted by Admiral Nancy Pierce, who had just returned from a tour of the outer colonies. Her report painted a very different picture from the chaos in council space. Human space now encompasses nearly twice the territory of our former council holdings, she announced. Our new colonies are more prosperous, more secure, and more technologically advanced than anything we achieved under council restrictions. What about our new trade partners? Asked the president. Expanding rapidly. The Kital Confederation has become our largest commercial ally. Their industrial output has increased by 800% since joining our economic network. The Resonance Collective provides communication services that make our entire civilization more efficient. Any security concerns? None whatsoever. Our new partners have no interest in dominance politics or territorial expansion. They are focused on technological development and improving living conditions for their populations. It is exactly the kind of partnership we always tried to build with the Council species. The differences were striking. In Council space, political maneuvering consumed enormous resources as different species competed for advantage over their neighbors. In human space, those same resources were directed toward research, development, and improving quality of life for all citizens. Education was another major difference. Council species had jealously guarded their knowledge, sharing advanced technology only with allies and only under strict conditions. Human colonies established open universities where any species could learn the most advanced science and engineering. The results were remarkable. Young Catal engineers were developing improvements to human fusion technology. Resonance entities were teaching humans new approaches to quantum mechanics. Former Council refugees were contributing innovations that advanced the entire human alliance. "We are building what we always tried to build," Admiral Pierce told the President. "A truly cooperative galactic civilization based on shared knowledge and mutual benefit." In the depths of space, automated human monitoring stations continued to observe Council territory. The signals they detected told a story of civilizational decline. Communication traffic had decreased by 70% as networks failed. Industrial output had collapsed to levels not seen for centuries. Scientific research had virtually stopped, as universities closed and research stations were abandoned. But the monitoring stations also detected something else. Small groups of ships from various species were heading not toward Council space, but toward human territory. These were refugees from the chaos, but not the usual desperate masses fleeing from war zones. These ships carried scientists, engineers, artists, teachers, and other educated professionals who had grown disgusted with Council politics. They were seeking societies that valued cooperation over dominance, progress over tradition, and innovation over political power. At Waypoint Alpha, the border station that processed new arrivals to human space, Station Commander Paul Martinez reviewed the latest group of applicants. 3 Keth scientists were seeking asylum after their government had ordered them to develop biological weapons for the ongoing war. A family of Valthic farmers wanted land where they could grow food for hungry people rather than cash crops for wealthy elites. Most interesting was a group of young Zeltharians who had publicly rejected their species' supremacist ideology. Their leader, a historian named Yelnara, had written extensively about the benefits of human-style cooperation. "Why do you want to live in human space?" Martinez asked during her immigration interview. "Because you have built the kind of society my people could have had if they had made better choices," she replied. "The Council taught us that cooperation was weakness and that domination was strength. You have proven them wrong. What makes you think you can adapt to our way of life?" "I have studied human history and philosophy for years. Your approach to solving problems makes far more sense than ours. Instead of fighting over limited resources, you find ways to create more resources. Instead of competing for power, you share power to achieve better results." Martinez approved her application immediately. Beings like Yelnara represented the future that humanity was building, a galaxy where intelligence and good intentions